Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Billi FitzSimons.
I'm Zara Seidler.
In case you're not yet fatigued with all of the politics news recently, we're here to look at a bit of a different angle. Does politics still have a women's problem? This week there have been a number of new party leaders. Sussan Ley was elected the first female leader of the Liberal Party, and just yesterday Larissa Waters was elected the leader of the Greens. It all comes as we now have more women in Parliament than ever before. So in this episode, we're going to look at what the representation of women in politics looks like today.
Billi, I just want to start by, outlining, you said they're a women's problem. I want to start by outlining what that means and what the metric of that issue and measuring that issue actually is.
Yeah, this has been, I think, a long-standing sentiment about the workplace culture in Parliament. I guess it's never really had a good reputation when it comes to how women are treated in politics. And I don't think that's something that's unique to Australia. That is a worldwide issue that we see in parliaments all around the world. And I think it is a really broad term, and that's because there are a few different things that kind of fit under that umbrella term. There's the treatment of female politicians by their own party. There's the treatment of female politicians by the media. There's the treatment of female staff members, so not just the politicians, but actually often the young staffers who work for those politicians and how they're treated in Parliament. There's also the representation of women in politics, so how many women are actually elected to Parliament to represent their communities. So there's a whole list of things that have historically triggered conversations about Parliament being seen as a pretty poor workplace for women. Again, that's a kind of a universal thing that is recognised. If you look to examples, there are many. I think the first one that comes to mind is Julia Gillard, who is from the Labor Party, and she was Australia's first ever female Prime Minister.
And only.
And again, it's pretty universally recognised, I think, that when she was Prime Minister, she was subject to quite sexist commentary and treatment, again, from within Parliament, but then also from the media. There was also Sarah Hanson-Young. She is a Green senator, and she actually won a defamation case against another senator who made repeated sexist slurs against her. So that kind of goes to how women are treated by their colleagues in Parliament. There was also Julia Banks, who is a former Liberal MP, and she actually published a book about the culture in politics, which she said was underpinned by sexism and misogyny. Now, that's barely scratching the surface, I think, of all of the different allegations that have come out of Parliament. But I did intentionally there pick three women from three different parties to highlight that historically this hasn't been a partisan issue. Yeah. Women from all different parties in Australia have spoken about this sexist culture in Parliament.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and it appears that at every step of the way for women trying to enter political office, there are these barriers to entry, both, at the very beginning in terms of actually being pre-selected for one of the major parties or minor parties, and all the way through to their colleagues, as you referred to earlier, making sexist slurs about them in the media, mistreating them. I do want to, though, just because we are just coming off an election, talk about the beginning of that process and the representation of women in politics and how they are or are not getting into Parliament in the first place. Can you talk me through where we're at with representation of women in our federal Parliament currently?
Yeah, it's funny. Just as you were saying that, I was thinking, as I had just gone through all of the different allegations that have been levelled in Parliament, that they kind of have a really big PR problem in terms of women. You would understand if women didn't want to go into Parliament because of all of these allegations.
There's a lot of commentary about that, about why women aren't putting their hands up, and it's because it is known to be so toxic. Yeah.
But then I do think that we actually do see a lot of women who do want to go into politics. And after this year's election, there will be more women in federal Parliament than ever before, and that's in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate. Now, Zara, you know this, but the listeners might not know that counting is actually still ongoing.
It's just beyond.
I know. And there are still a number of seats that are way too close to call.
But postal votes are due today. They have to have been received by the AEC by today.
Yes.
So this process has to come to an end. Just has to.
Yes. But already, without some seats even called, there are a record number of women elected to Parliament. Also, we have already spoken on the pod this week about the fact that Prime Minister Anthony Albanese unveiled his cabinet this week, and there will also be more women in the cabinet than ever before. I believe the actual cabinet, which is the most senior ministers in government, women hold exactly 50% of those positions.
I do think it's worth here, though, calling out that the Labor Party, so Anthony Albanese's party, does have quotas that they need to meet, a specific number of women that need to be represented. Can you talk to me about quotas and where we're at with that right now?
Yeah, you're right. So Labor does have quotas. They actually first introduced quotas in 1994. Now, how...
Long time ago.
Yeah, and how quotas works here is it all has to do with pre-selection. So obviously you can't control who gets elected because that's up to the community. Yes, that's up to us. But what they can control is who is pre-selected. So they can control how many women they choose to be the candidates for the Labor Party in each electorate that they are running in.
And just to be really clear when you're referring to pre-selection, so that's the process of the party deciding who the candidate in each seat will be. And that's a vote by specific branch members. And there's a whole nother conversation to have about the fact that traditionally those branch members have been men and that there is an effort to change that so that there are more women getting up to be pre-selected. But that is the earliest stage of someone's political candidacy.
Yeah. And so in 1994, Labor introduced a 35% pre-selection quota for women. Interestingly, specifically, they said it had to be in winnable seats.
About to say, This is the other thing, that oftentimes women are put up in seats that the party can't possibly win.
Yes, so in very safe Liberal seats, for example. But this specifically said that it had to be 35% of women were pre-selected in winnable seats. And that had to happen by 2002. Now, this was then replaced in 2012 with a 40-40-20 quota system.
So many numbers.
So many numbers. So that meant that 40% needed to be women, 40% needed to be men, and then the remaining 20% could be filled by candidates of either gender. And that is still the quota today, but they did have a target of 50% of female representation by 2025.
And how are they tracking?
Well, they've actually surpassed it now. So after the last election, at the current count, the Labor Party room will be 57% women.
There you go. Super, super fascinating. That is obviously just one side of politics, though. And there has been a lot of discussion since the election about the coalition, or more specifically about the Liberal Party and the representation of women in that party, and certainly how the party is relating to female voters. Just this week, we had Sussan Ley become the first female leader of the Liberal Party. Can you explain how the Liberal Party thinks about representation?
Hi, I'm Ola.
And I'm Elliot.
We're the two-person team behind everything video and audio here at the Daily Aus.
If you want to help us grow so we can deliver more of the content that you love, be sure to hit subscribe.
Now let's get back to the video.
Yeah, the Liberal Party is definitely very different to the Labor Party when it comes to this. They don't have quotas. What they do have, though, is targets. And that's just a bit different to a quota because it's not a requirement. It's just a general
A guidance.
Aim. Yes. Yeah. So the Liberal Party set an aim about a decade ago now to have 50% of female representation in Parliament by 2025. So we've chosen a good time to talk about this because
everything's due now.
Yes. It has not happened. At last count after the last election, there will be about 5, potentially 6 women in the House of Representatives just for the Liberal Party. So that's not including the coalition. But just for the Liberal Party, there will be about 5 or 6 women in the House of Representatives. That is not 50% of the number of people who were elected.
And I've seen a lot of Liberal Party members, whether they be staffers or former senators, former MPs, talking about the fact that maybe the Liberal Party does have to consider implementing quotas. I know that one person, Charlotte Mortlock, who set up Hilmer's Network, which is trying to get more women into the Liberal Party, she started a petition to try and pressure the Liberal Party to adopt quotas. But it doesn't seem like right now they are going to do that. What are some of the arguments against quotas?
I think the general argument that always comes up about quotas is the idea that people should be selected for jobs or selected for a promotion because they're the best person for the job and not because a quota needs to be filled. So that's the argument against them. And I think there's always this concern that if there are quotas in place, that people won't be getting jobs because of their merit for that role. I think the word merit is the word that keeps coming up when people are arguing against quotas. Jacinta Price, who sits in the Liberal Party room, was actually asked about this the other week because, like you said, it's a big topic of conversation at the moment. She's against quotas. Here's a little bit of what she told Sky News.
You know, I would hate to think that I ever got to my position on the fact that I'm a woman or anything else for that matter. Merit is what you need, certainly, to be able to fight our fight that we need to fight, as opposed to just putting somebody in a position based on their gender.
So I think that quite accurately sums up the arguments against it.
I am curious, though, now that the party is led by a woman in Sussan Ley, do we know what her position on quotas is?
We know what her position was prior to her being elected leader.
Yeah.
So in 2021, she said that she was in favour of quotas and she told Channel 9's Today Show at the time that she believed in a 40% quota, which I imagine would be similar to exactly what we said Labor had.
Yeah.
So again, that would mean that women are pre-selected by the Liberal Party for 40% of all the electorates that they are running for in the country. But then after she was elected the leader earlier this week, she was asked by a journalist what her views are on quotas now. Here is a little bit of what she said.
I want to say right here and now, we need more women in our party. We need more women in our party organisation. We need more women in this party room. Had we done better at the last election, we would have outstanding women in this party room. And I don't want to name one or two because I know I'm going to miss two or three.
So she did say that they need more women in the Liberal Party, but she didn't say that she was in favour of quotas now. And I imagine she has to be much more careful about what she says, considering she's the leader. And I guess it's not entirely up to her, but she definitely obviously holds more weight today than she did in 2021.
And I do think that it's worth just finishing this conversation by saying that the discussion about quotas is not unique to the Labor Party, the Liberal Party, politics itself. It's a conversation that's unfolding across boardrooms, across companies, everywhere around the world. This discussion about how to get more women into leadership roles is certainly one that is being had everywhere. And because these politicians work for us and represent us, you know, it does become quite a microcosm for this discussion. But certainly we'll be keeping an eye on the Liberal Party to get a sense of if there is going to be movement on this issue.
Yeah, and I think one more thing to mention is that obviously this is just a 10-minute podcast, and if we had more time, I think it's also worth a discussion that, you know, women in Parliament is one thing, but there are so many other ways that you can have quotas to represent the diversity of Australia.
Yeah, it's a really good point to end on. Billi, thank you so much for taking us through that.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for another week of the Daily Aus. If you want to help this podcast grow, the best way you can do that is by hitting follow on whatever platform you are listening to us on. We so appreciate your support, and we'll see you next week.